Hello, how's it going? So I'm back here in Philadelphia. It's nice to be back home. Not in love with being in the city, but I'm actually where I live, where my stuff is, where my wife is, where my animals are, and I just feel, the instant you walk in the door, you just feel comfortable. It's nice to have that feeling back again. I don't know how long this is gonna last. I've had some issues with my parents, not fights or anything, but their health is declining, and I have to go help them out. So anyway, I'm back here. As I say, I'm not in love with being in the city, but I like being at home. And uh, one of the things that I've noticed in life, especially in the last, let's say, 10 to 15 years, is that people love playing games with words. They might not even know they're playing a game, but it's very clear that the more you look around, the more you listen to people who talk about any number of subjects, um, will have a different definition for a word. So uh, this could be honest, like my life is not the same as your life. So when we talk about love, your love might be more, sort of love for like a romantic love, and I might be talking more about sort of friend type love. There's a really good book by C.S. Lewis called The Four Loves, where he talks about this and the different meanings of it, and how sometimes in English, while we have the biggest vocabulary, we're quite poor when it comes to subjects, and love is one of those because there are different types of love. And that's honest when we talk about, oh, I love, I love music. Some people, just like they enjoy music. Some people like they crave music. It's everything to them. We're clearly talking about something very different. Um, and that might be a question of an intensity. But the thing is that's just an example of how uh, our definitions could be different. And often this is just an honest discrepancy. Based on experience or based on what's on your mind at the moment. But it's helpful to keep in mind that you and everyone else has you. We all have a definition for words, and these could be blurry, could be very different, and it's helpful to realize that we might not be talking about the same thing. And if the more abstract the concept that we're talking about, like love, or I'm going to go into examples later. Love, or patriotism, or fairness. The more abstract these concepts are, the more room there is for variation in how we look at that subject. And I think that it's just really helpful to bear in mind that. So I'll give you a couple examples of just sort of definitions of things rather than, or just like adjectives. And then we'll move on to nouns. It sounds like an English lesson. But if you take the term right and wrong, right and wrong really depends. When you use that term, it usually depends on who the doer of the action, the performer of the action is. Not necessarily in a sort of purely, how would you say it? Just a purely antiseptic way. The thing is, think about who you are. And when you use the word right and wrong, you're sort of tipping your hand about what you think right and wrong is, rather than there being sort of a universal right and a universal wrong. Um, and often you give yourself more credit, you find yourself more in the right, less in the wrong than you would do to others. You give yourself more credit, more slack than other people, and you probably extend this to a great deal to your friends and your family. You tighten that definition of right and you expand the definition of wrong to people who are your opponents, to people you don't know, to your enemies, that you were more likely to find them in the wrong than in the right. And that's because you want bad things for your enemies and you want them to be wrong, and therefore it justifies your hatred for them or your opponent, your opposition to their views, or whatever they're, if you're talking about politics, policy, or their candidate or something like that. So you always remember that you were, when it comes down to flipping a coin, you're more likely to land on good for yourself and your people around you and your own cause than you are to do bad. You have to find bad. And if it's somebody you don't like or someone who opposes you, this could be very plain in just sports. It's more likely to be a strike than a ball, depending on who your pitcher is. Usually, if your team is playing and they're pitching, you're more likely to have, the call a strike. Just because it suits you. It does, a great deal of, it helps your cause. Let's put it like that. The same thing for adjectives of good and bad. This is very similar. That good, people will get called good when sometimes everything that they do points to the opposite, but because they're on your side, they get called good. And when somebody on the other side, they're probably more likely to be called bad by you and your let's call it like that. So your ethics, your moral judgment really are fluid, and they really depend on who you are in your relationship to the situation. And that reminds me of an expression. I don't remember the exact origin of this expression, but it basically says, where you stand depends on where you sit. Your stance on a topic or just a simple judgment call depends a great deal on your relationship within that topic. And a judgment call, who is it that we're judging? You're more likely to make it good if if you find that person's close to you or has the same values as you. Whether or not they're right or they're wrong or they're good or they're bad in a more, let's say, objective or universal sense. We don't live in that world most of the time. We're probably the truest to our own definition if we have no dog in the fight. If we don't, if it's new, these people are neutral, the policy is neutral, I just don't care, so I'll be an indifferent or an arbiter of a situation or a referee or whatever. So I think, that's a lot about definitions. Remember, you're kind of using these judgment terms and these qualitative terms based on who you are and how you feel about the subject, rather than trying to be objective about things. So when you discuss a topic with anybody, especially when judgment is in the air or is relating to abstract ideas, you really need to define your terms. And so that this ambiguity is avoided or minimalized. And so that, I'll go into details of this. So you might walk away from a discussion wrongly thinking that you agree on something or that you disagree on something, purely because you don't have the same definitions for words. You might walk away, what an asshole. Like he thinks that, this thing, you might be completely in agreement. You just didn't use the same words. Or when a word is said, you don't have the same idea, but the overall judgment, you might agree on something. And so the thing is, you kind of have to, if you define your terms straight up, especially the judgment terms and the abstract terms, you might walk away with a completely different view of that conversation and the person you were talking to. And I think that, there's just too much unnecessary misunderstanding, which could be avoided by a quick review of definitions. So if you've ever done science or, let's say, hard social sciences, so I've done a lot of economics in my time. I have a master's degree in it. And they kind of throw you in at the deep end in grad school about definitions. Before you start talking about a definition or any word, you have to start thinking, well, what does this mean? What is elasticity mean? What is, what does GDP mean? If we're talking about even more vague terms, what does it mean? So when we use this word, everybody, because we got this out of the way, we had a little sort of announcement at the beginning. This is what I mean when I mean elasticity. It turns out that there are many different types of elasticity. That's just neither here nor there. So you can avoid a lot of confusion or misunderstanding if you just get your terms out of the way. And if you really are trying to get to the bottom of the subject, you need to start defining things. If you're just talking to move the wind around, then it really doesn't matter. I mean, if you're looking for an argument, the best way to get to continue having an argument is just to misunderstand each other and assume the worst. I think that, that putting those out there is important. You're putting out your definitions is important. But remember, it doesn't always work because some people will still misunderstand, which means that there might be a difference in your attitude or even your level of comprehension. This person might know a lot more than you or a lot less than you about the subject. You could have arguments about definitions all you want, but it becomes sort of a meta argument, and then the original discussion just kind of gets brushed aside. But some people will, that's assuming the best of people, that the intentions are good. But it doesn't always work because some people will actually play games with you. They're trying to mess with you, either just to win an argument purely. They actually don't care about anything. They're just really just trying to win an argument. Or they want to paint you as wrong, evil, whatever. They're trying to paint you in a bad light. And that's when you have to worry. And then you can, I would assume the best intentions on their behalf, but I would kind of be ready for the worst. So if you really want to, I wouldn't just jump to be defensive right away. I would say that if you're get ready for malevolence, because in a sense, like when you're having an argument like this or a dispute, sometimes and often everyone, if you've made it this far in life to be watching this video, you've had an argument and there has been malevolence in it, and you might have been that person who wanted to assume the worst. So if you do detect a great deal of malevolence, the twisting of your words, I think it's best just to stay away from this. It'll be, you will, you just won't be wasting your time, and you won't get flustered, and just, you'll probably be happier in the end if you just avoid conversations from people who are twisting your words. So I'll leave it at that, and I'll give you some examples where definitions of things really matter in a real sense. So a lot of these are very abstract concepts. I'm not talking about what iron is or what a cup of tea is, right? So these are abstract concepts, but they're important to us. So let's say fairness. What does it mean to be fair? Well, does it mean to be even-handed, or is it, is it to be, see, it's quite hard to come up with what the word fair means. Is it to be even-handed? So if you're making a judgment, like as a parent or something like that, you decide, okay, you've had enough time on this video game, you let your brother play with it. Or you say, okay, I'm giving the same allowance to both of you, even though one of them clearly does more work or does a better job of it. I want to be fair. I want to give both of them the same amount of money. Well, the thing is that fair. Well, the one who receives less or seems the same amount of money, for more work or better work, receiving the same amount of money for somebody who just does a half-assed job, that doesn't seem fair. That I do more work, I do better work, I should be paid better. That's fair to him. Obviously, at this point, we're at an impasse. And so all of these words, when you haven't decided what the word fair means, you're at an impasse. Obviously, we don't agree on what that definition is. So how could you be fair if I don't even agree what the word fair means? Another one is equality. So what does it mean in the world? I'm here in America. So what does it mean that we live in an equal society? Um, are we talking about equality of bank accounts? Well, we don't live in that world. Are we talking about equality in the voting booth? One person, one vote? It seems that way. Are we talking about equality in the courtroom? Uh, well, you're opening a whole can of worms there. Okay, so everybody does get to go to trial. But obviously, if you have a really good lawyer, he could tie up that court system so much that they might not even they think it's worth it. The prosecutor might not even want to prosecute you, especially if the crime is not that high. I'm not talking about murder, but maybe sort of fines and stuff that your lawyer, if you're rich, really tie up the court system and make life hell for the prosecutor. And likewise, if you don't have money, the state has a lot of resources and they could really just run over you. And if you are just given let's say a public defender, this is somebody who's usually just out of law school, might not know all the tricks that there are to pull in the courtroom, and might not know all of the the precedents that you need to know to say, okay, well, in this last case, maybe 20 years ago, that this option was given. You as a poor person might not have the same benefits, but you did get your day in court. You did get a public defender at the public's expense. It is a little bit more fair than just getting railroaded. But I don't know that you could ever be fair in that. Or equal in that sense. So what about equality in education? You could put somebody in a classroom with another person, and they're going through the same curriculum with the same teacher in the same exact spot in the classroom. Yet one person is going to get more out of that lesson than the other person, and then every subsequent lesson after that. Some people are just better at education. So we might not be able to provide pure equality without being unfair. So, we could say, oh, everything's equal, but we have to be unfair about things. We have to steal your money from you. Well, is that fair? Is that equal? We might provide fairness, but we're not going to make you equal. We're going to, basically just say, in order to be fair, you say like you have to enjoy your rights, your property rights. So we're already at an impasse as far as equality is concerned. So racism is a big topic. I'm not actually going to go into what is racism, what isn't racism. Well, I will define the different definitions and see that we're at an impasse. So, some people will say, racism is where you treat other people of other races like crap, really based on their race. Either you abuse them in the street, or you just don't hire people only because of their race, or something along those lines. It's within you that you are just nasty to people of a certain race or any other race other than your own. And that seems to be the classic definition of that. Now comes along a new definition of it, where you have these vague allusions to historical events that nobody alive, or nobody who's an adult was alive, or like let's say under the age of 60 was alive during Jim Crow and had any control over the situation. They were just children back then. Is it fair to call them racist? The people who had no hand in any, let's say, historical injustices like keeping people out of work, or keeping them out of certain schools, or doing anything to prohibit them from what most of us would call fair. Is it fair to call anybody who just happens to have the same skin color as somebody who did something really nasty years ago? Well, some people would say yes, that is racism. You happen to have the same color of skin as somebody who did something nasty years ago. And these situations may or may not be deterministic, but that's another debate for another time. And essentially that one form of racism is purely in how you treat other people, and the other form of racism is basically condemnation of blood, which is not very fair. Depends on how you see things. Another issue, and this is probably the last one I'll talk about, is representation. So, if you've ever, I would recommend if you're into what the role of a representative is, there is I call it an essay. It's titled a letter. It's called A Letter to the Sheriffs of Bristol, written by Edmund Burke. Edmund Burke was an MP in Britain, and he represented the area of Bristol, which is sort of in the west of England, really close to Wales. And he was elected by the sheriffs of Bristol. So he was there to represent them in Parliament. And he basically said, I vote the way I do in Parliament because you have elected me not just as somebody to press a button or sign something for you. You have elected me because you hold the same values as I hold. I'm going out there and voting my conscience. And so long as you are fine with me voting my conscience, keep on electing me. If you don't agree with me, vote for someone else. So this is a form of, what does representation mean? In some forms of representation, a definition would be you elect somebody. Let's say I'm here in the state of Pennsylvania. I elect somebody locally, go to Harrisburg, which is the state capital, or send them down to Washington, D.C., to vote on a certain topic in a certain way. I want you to vote yes on blah, blah, blah. Or maybe you might be electing, so that's basically you're going down there and pressing a button for me. It's almost like I want you to go buy bread for me. You might not like bread. You're not going to eat it. You're not even going to look at it so far as you're just carrying it back to me. You are my representative. You're just my gopher or dog's body. And that's what you are. You're just doing my bidding. Or are you, as a representative, somebody who votes in a certain manner, a certain pattern, a certain philosophy on our behalf? I can't tell you how, you could say to your representative, I can't tell you how to vote on everything. But I see that you are conservative, or I see that you are progressive, and this is the attitude I want representative of me in Washington or in Harrisburg or wherever your state capital is, or at the city level, or any level that you have somebody representing you. So the thing is that, okay, I want you to go down and vote and press a button for me right now. I don't care about what you think, whether you like it or not, you're representing me. Or likewise, you can say, I like the way you think. Go down there, and so long as you keep on thinking the way you do and talking the way you do, we're fine. Just keep going down there. I trust you. So those are two different forms of representation, and this is something that Edmund Burke had written about. Now, there's another form of representation. It's like, I want somebody who looks like me. This is very, very representative in the sense of I want somebody with the same skin tone as me. And I want somebody with the same hair color and the same sex or the same, sexual identity or, the same history as me. You might find yourself going down to, very specific details because you feel that anybody who has the same experience as you will be representative of you. Well, as a counter to that, I would say that I might have the same skin tone as you. There are a lot of people in Washington who have the exact same skin tone, the exact same religion, the exact same ethnic background, the same class as me, who do not represent my values, my view on government at all. In fact, there's one in the White House, but I'm not going to be nailing on him. We come from the same part of the country. He is older than me, so we don't have the age thing in problem. He has the same education as me, same working class-ish background, same ethnic background, Irish American, and same skin color. We have so much in common, yet I don't really feel represented by him. And so the thing is that that's not very representative of me, or of him to me. But at the same time, I might have something more in common with somebody who isn't of the same class as me, isn't as the same color as me, isn't as the same sex as me, the same anything, the ethnic background, whatever, your religion. And I look at somebody like, like I said earlier, I think in a more libertarian / moderate conservative way. And I find somebody like Thomas Sowell, who doesn't have the same skin color as me, same ethnic background, the same class. He grew up very poor. He grew up in New York City. I didn't grow up in New York City, but he represents the way I think very, very carefully. I mean, like very closely. So, who is representative? I think that if the more you drill down on the way somebody represents you, you start getting into weird areas. So, like I say, people play games with words, and if you hear things like representative, you have to say, well, what do you mean by representative? Or somebody said, well, that's racism. We're like, well, what is your definition of racism? Because I'm just hearing something where we're not aligned. Or what's your definition of equality? Because what you're saying, using that word, does not really sort of reconcile with the way I think about it, or fairness, or anything you say like that. So I really think that people should be careful with their words. And if there's any ambiguity there, define your words. You're doing everyone else a favor, and you're probably doing yourself a favor. So that's all. I went a little long today, and I will see you soon. Bye-bye.